In today's episode, that's not a usable ground. UMM, vendor support. Broken laptop. It says boat, so that's where it goes. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. That's not a usable ground. Once upon a time in the not-so-distant past, I installed large-scale PBX phone systems in a number of southern states. We did hospitals, businesses, and a surprising number of department stores. It was one of those stores where this story takes place. I was working for a company whose phone systems had an onboard computer system complete with 8-inch floppies, and a distinct dislike for unsteady power. We had a strict list of requirements for the room environmentals, and the power and grounding. The room needed to be clean and without excessive dust, with climate control temperature in the 70-degree range on the Fahrenheit scale. Most of all, it needed dedicated 3-phase 208 vac power, with a dedicated computer ground. This involved the XO lug on the supply transformer, and ideally included a link to a ground rod or building steel. The number of times I, a brash young guy in my mid-20s, had to inform a crusty good old boy electrician that what he thought was a ground wasn't good enough and whether the resultant storm still gives me nightmares, but it paled to one install I did in a small city in South Carolina. I arrived at the start of the scheduled installation week bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to go. As we descended to the intended phone room, I became quickly aware of the technological revelation that we were bringing to this store. Sitting outside the phone room was the current phone console, with the operator wearing a headset, and very literally switching and connecting calls like you see in old movies, plugging and unplugging cables in an upright patch panel. Keep in mind that this was the late 80s. From the room next to our destination, I heard a steady clack 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 of machinery. Upon entry, I discovered that the phone system was the old-style stepping switch equipment. The noise in the room was deafening and relays and contacts continually made and released. My interest in the antiquated equipment was, however, dampened by the condition of the room. They had mounted the plywood on the wall that we required for our 66 blocks, wiring points, and electrical power had been pulled into the room, but that was it. There was no ground bar, no power. The room was at least 90 degrees, and worst of all, the floor was covered in such a thick layer of dirt and dust that we were leaving footprints as we walked. I immediately informed our customer contact that this was not acceptable and why, and after I left a specific list of items that needed to be done before I returned, I drove back to the airport to return home. A week later, I returned to the site, and things were better marginally. The floor had been wet mopped, so that parts of it were now at least clean enough to see the tile, but other sections were covered with dried mud where the mop water and floor dirt combined and settled down together. The ground and electrical still hadn't been done, and the HVAC contractor was there giving a quote for putting AC in the room. The room was still unusable and the client wasn't happy when I told him as much. We had one more quick meeting going over the problems, and handwritten copies of our requirements were given to everyone involved, and a few people that weren't. Since the floor in that spot was relatively clean, I uncrated and moved the phone switch, the main cabinet with the phone system, in this case about 6 feet by 6 feet by 3 feet, into position, and mounted some of my equipment on the wall. I then returned home for another week. 1 week later, I was on site in the store's basement again, and this time was pleasantly surprised to feel a blast of cool air hit me in the face as I opened the door. The floor had been decently cleaned and looked good. My pleasure started slipping as I walked through the room, however. The electrical source still was not terminated. I saw no ground bar on the wall. The air conditioning had been lovingly and professionally installed, complete with open-top drip pan, directly over the top of my $200,000 phone system. My imagination didn't have to work hard to figure out where that condensation was going to the first time that the drip pan drain clogged and the pan overflowed, and the realization wasn't good. Calming myself, I asked about the 208V power. The building engineer replied that they had tried and were unable to find that particular NEMA connector anywhere. I grabbed the nearest phone book, remember it's the 80s, specifically the yellow pages, and found an electrical supply store within walking distance. I left the store and walked down to the supplier, who quickly sold me the necessary electrical connector. I took it back and tossed it to the engineer with a jaunty "There you go." Then I addressed the last item on my list. "Where's the ground?" I asked. The engineer pointed me to a large 1.5 braided copper cable mounted in the corner. It disappeared into holes in the floor and the ceiling. "Okay," I said, pointing to the hole in the floor. "Where does that go?" I asked. "To a 6-foot ground rod under the building," the engineer replied proudly. "Excellent," I replied. "And where does that go?" I asked, pointing to the hole in the ceiling that the cable disappeared into. "To the lightning rods on the roof," he replied. He wanted me to connect his new $200,000 phone system, and every phone in the building, to the lightning rods on the roof. We didn't do the installation that weekend, either. UMM, vendor support. I work for an MSP. Call comes in from a client. Our vendor was doing some scripting on our dev/test partition, broke something, and hasn't been able to fix it in a week and a half. It's seriously holding up our testing and training. Is there any chance Radicus can take a look? $me, yeah, of course. What are the symptoms? $client, running the restore command results in thousands of KSH jobs being spawned, and no files get restored. Yeah, obviously it's a Unix system, exact flavor is immaterial. First thought is that it sounds like a runaway recursion in a script, but restore is a built-in OS command, not a script. And there's no way something that simple would take a week and a half to track down. No way. $me, okay, let's take a look. I tracked it down in 10 minutes. These geniuses, these wonder coders, these unsung wizards of Perl and Shell, created a wrapper script for the restore command. Invoked the restore command by name instead of by full path. Named their wrapper script restore as well. Placed it in a directory that comes first in root's $path variable. And then couldn't track it down for a week and a half. How did they expect it to work in the first place? Sigh. Vendors. Broken laptop. Working as a desktop support some time ago, I once got this call. "Can you please come down, my laptop is broken." Thinking to myself that everybody contacts me with broken laptop. What exactly is with your laptop, please? Can you please be more specific? It is broken, come and see. I have come out of curiosity, and her laptop was broken. There was a 10 to 15 centimeters crack in the chassis with wires going out, and I was just amused. I asked how did she manage to do that. I unplugged it from docking station. These were the older types of Dell docking stations with the button needed to be pressed in order to remove the laptop. "Did you press the button though?" Lady was amused. "Did I have to?" I just wondered how did she manage to work with her laptop before, as she has been in the company for a long time, and what kind of force did she have to use to make this damage? It says boat, so that's where it goes. I help maintain the back office settings of a program we use to give out loans, including boat loans. I received ticket asking to add power of attorney to the boat loan. No big deal, I can just go through and attach it to the loan product after making anything that can be feasible automatically pull from the system when it can. Takes a couple days just to make sure I get it programmed right. I take about a day, go through it, and right before I go to add it to the product I notice that nowhere does it actually say boat on the POA itself, so essentially the work I did could be added to other loans as well and not have to worry about it later. But the ticket only said added to the boat loan. Knowing the process, it's much easier to add it now to the other loans than it is to add it later. Once it's been compiled by the program, you can't just then go and add it to other things. It's silly. I would need to use their version control, which is a pain in the rear. So just to make sure I send an email to the person who opened the ticket. Hey, I know you opened the ticket for the boat loan, but since this is a generic POA, I was wondering if you might in the future want it for the other loans. I could add it now to the other loans with no problem. Then, I said put it to the boat loan. It's not that difficult to follow the ticket. It says boat. So that's where it goes, it can't be that difficult. I don't understand why everything becomes 20 questions when we open these tickets. So I put it on the boat and closed the ticket. Guess what? 2 days later a ticket comes in. Please add this power of attorney to other loans.